Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Today we're going to be speaking about aphids in your crops with Svetlana Misic from the Albany office. Thank you, Svet.
Thank you, everyone. First of all, just in summary of what I am about to talk about, it's really important to identify the aphids that are in canola crops because one species, the green peach aphid, does develop resistance very readily to insecticides. Only control green peach aphid in canola crops if the crop is not able to outgrow the feeding damage. That means the crop is either at the seedling stage or it is an established crop that is moisture stressed. Thresholds for spraying in canola is if 20% or more of flowering spikes have aphids on them, or in cereals, the threshold for spraying is if there are 50% or more tillers with 30 or more aphids on them, then you can have up to a 10% yield loss. The rest of this talk is going to be talking about aphids in more detail. One thing we've been getting asked quite a bit is what is the life cycle of an aphid? Basically, it takes 8 to 10 days for a nymph to reach adulthood, to become a reproductive female, because all aphids are female. A female aphid gives birth to 3 to 4 aphids a day, and as many as 10 have been recorded. And the female aphid can live for longer than a month, depending on temperature and how healthy she is. As the plant starts to senesce, female aphids give birth to young which form wings. These winged aphids will then go and colonize another food source. If it's not a crop, it'll be an alternative food source. So for cereal aphids, it's grasses, and for canola aphids, it's weeds such as radishes. The aphids cannot live in the absence of a food source, so you won't find aphids undergoing any diapause or hibernating over summer or anything like that. They can't live if there's no food source. One thing that it's quite important is to be able to identify the aphid species, especially the canola aphids. There are 3 aphids that are found in canola. The turnip aphid, which has black legs and short black antennae. The cabbage aphid, which is a green aphid with a white powdered coating on the outside. And the green peach aphid, which is a light green aphid found on the underside of leaves. The green peach aphid has developed resistance to quite a few insecticides and does develop resistance quite readily. In the cereals, there are only 2 aphids that are usually found in Western Australia in cereals: the corn aphid, which is quite dark in colour, and the oat aphid, which has 2 reddish patches on the abdomen. It's really important to be able to identify the aphid species because green peach aphid is the main virus vector. It's the main virus vector for the beet western yellow virus group. This virus is only an issue if crops at the seedling stage are infested, and it can cause significant yield loss. However, green peach aphid infestations of well-established crops, even if they transmit the virus and the crop is past the seedling stage and it's at budding, it's not known to cause yield loss, and their feeding damage is not known to cause yield loss. The thing with the green peach aphid is that it can, in the seedling stage, cause crop death, and that's why there are no thresholds for the number of aphids it does take to cause a seedling to die, because if the crop is moisture stressed, it may not outgrow the feeding damage from the green peach aphid as well as a unstressed crop. But rule of thumb is if green peach aphid are in a crop, assess how well the crop is growing. If the crop is flowering and podding, it's unlikely to be causing a yield loss. However, if the crop is at the seedling stage and you are seeing large patches of no crop, that does suggest that the aphid feeding damage is moving out and potentially a spray may be required. but really spray only if you have to, and consider, instead of spraying the entire paddock, if the green peach aphid are in patches, consider spraying only patches. It's a good idea to consider which chemicals you're going to use if you're going to control green peach aphid. These aphids are highly resistant to synthetic pyrethroids. There's moderate resistance recorded in the OP group. So I suggest if you're going to use an OP, do a spot spray and see how many of the aphids are actually susceptible. If you do have a high number, say 80%, that do die, bear in mind that the remainder will all be resistant to the OPs, so you can only use it once in a season. Sulfoxaflor, there's no resistance recorded as yet in Western Australia. Sulfoxaflor's got the trade name Transform, and you can only use that twice in a season. Cabbage aphids causing yield loss in unstressed canola. Last year we conducted a lab trial to see whether or not cabbage aphids caused yield loss in unstressed canola. What we found was that when the cabbage aphids were introduced into the main stem that had aphids on it did have less yield than the control. What we found was that the threshold for spraying cabbage aphids is between 20 to 50% of flowering spikes that have aphid colonies of 2.5 centimetres or more. This is important if you're in the low rainfall region, because in the low rainfall region it is the main stem where the majority of yield comes from, according to research conducted by Mark Seymour here at the Department of Agriculture. What he also found was that in the higher rainfall regions, the majority of yield is actually from the secondary stems, so that's the spikes that are coming off that main stem. Now, what about cereal aphids? Cereal aphids are a vector of the virus barley yellow dwarf virus. Right now, at this moment in time, with crops past tillering, it's not an issue. BYDV is definitely an issue when we have a wet summer and a high aphid burden, and it can spread into crops. However, there is further information at the end of this slide as to where you can find out more about BYDV. Right now, the issue is whether or not the cereal aphids will cause feeding damage that can cause yield loss. Trials conducted by Phil Michael basically found that if you have 50% or more of tillers with 30 aphids or more, and the earlier this occurs, the more yield loss there is. But in his trials, he only ever recorded up to 10% yield loss. 3 years ago, when we had a very high numbers of cereal aphids in crops, when people actually went back and looked at what the potential yield loss was from the aphids, they actually found that they caused more yield loss by using ground rigs to spray the crop than they would have had they just left the aphids there. So do weigh up what the potential yield is and what the yield loss will be from the crop versus any crop damage that may occur from spraying, and versus the cost of application using aircraft. One thing a lot of growers have been wondering about is, what does beneficials in an aphid colony look like? How can you tell if there is being parasitism? Well, the aphids are bloated and quite shiny. That means that they've been parasitized, as these canola aphids have been here. Or alternatively, they do have a white fungus on them. Now, the fungal infections are known to cause colonies to collapse. Parasitism and predators are known to keep the colony from growing. But right now, if you do see predators, it might be an idea to choose insecticides which are soft on them, because the more predators you have in a crop, the more likely it is that they'll keep the aphids at threshold. One thing to consider for next year, especially if you've had aphids going into crops early season, is that stubble retention does decrease aphid colonisation. Controlling any weeds around the crop will also stop aphids from moving in there. However, bear in mind that a few years ago we did have a lot of aphids moving into crops, and it did come from neighbours. Unfortunately, we can't predict the weather, but The warmer it is, the more likely that the aphid life cycle will be quite short, so you'll have aphids developing quite quickly. And insecticide seed treatments definitely do work to keep aphids out of crops early season. Right now they've started to wear off, especially as canola is at big bud or even flowering, and cereals are well past tillering, or some are even just at the flag leaf stage. If you are considering putting an insecticide in with your final nitrogen application, do consider the fact that that's not going to keep aphids out of the crop. You can still get colonisation occurring, and do weigh up the thresholds of what the projected yield loss is based on the thresholds, especially for cereal aphids. Here's some places where you can go for further information. Thank you very much.